You should already have them in your course file, but if you don't, you just need to make yourself a note to make sure that you swing back around and get this stuff. All right, what's the function of valves? What's the point of having valves in our heart? And what does backflow mean? So blood goes the wrong way. So blood's moving in the wrong direction. So valves help keep blood moving in the correct direction. The last unit that we did, or the last lesson that we did, you looked at the structures of the heart. This lesson within this unit is looking more at the dysfunction. Well, it's taking the dysfunction as far as in terms of what you might observe in a doctor's office, because you did look at some heart dysfunction with anatomical things in the last lesson as well. So when blood is backflowing, when blood goes the wrong way, that's called regurgitation. So whenever the heart valves leak for whatever reason, the blood moves in the wrong direction, that's regurgitation. That's a problem, because if blood's not going in the right direction, then you don't have oxygenated blood making it out to the cells. You don't have deoxygenated blood making it to the lungs so that it can get oxygenated. Right? Regurgitation is a term that you might come across. Prolapse. So regurgitation could be due to prolapse. And prolapse is when the valves don't close smoothly, evenly. They don't close all the way when that heart contracts. Most of the time those ventricles contract, that blood gets pushed back up against those valves and it makes them shut. Prolapse is when a valve, for whatever reason, might extend back up into the atrium. Maybe the chordae tendineae are messed up, maybe the papillary muscles are weak, maybe the valve itself has issues with it, and so it kind of balloons back into, I gotta shut this for a minute, balloons back into the atrium. So instead of shutting completely, if it's allowed to balloon back in the atrium, then we've got this little gap here where that blood can leak back through. So regurgitation, backflow of blood, prolapse, issues with the heart valves not closing smoothly. Stenosis, I think it had stenosis on one of those PowerPoints somewhere. Stenosis is when the valves are too stiff. So I gotta shut this for a second. So prolapse is like the valves are too flappadoodle, I guess. I don't know, they're too weak, they're not closing. And stenosis is when it's too, when the valves are too stiff. And so the blood's trying to get through, but they can just barely open for the blood to get through instead of opening all the way and letting the blood rush in. Regurgitation, backflow blood, prolapse, the flaps don't close smoothly. They have a gap, they leave, are left open. Stenosis, the valves don't fully open because they might be too stiff, or the opening for the blood to move through is too narrow. A healthy heartbeat, they say that's a lub-dub sound. You may have described it somewhat differently, but you've got nice, clean sounds, and a healthy heartbeat is going to have a normal rhythm. So arrhythmia is an abnormal rhythm. A normal rhythm is for a healthy heartbeat. Regurgitation, we talked about back up here. But you listen to some heart sounds that had regurgitation in it, and so you'll notice that you've got some whooshing sounds in there in between the lub-dub sounds. Stenosis, we talked about stenosis and what that is. So because of the fact that those valves are a little bit stiff, there's also like a little click in there somewhere where those valves are trying to open. Prolapse, we talked about prolapse, and what prolapse is due to. So prolapse is going to have our lub-dub sound, but there's going to be a whoosh in there where that blood's backflowing. So that whoosh sound is it going back through this little gap in those valves. So those were our main heart sounds. For the lung sounds, they talked about the fact that healthy lung sounds, you can hear that nice, clean, clear whoosh of air. Inhale and exhale, and it doesn't sound like there's anything else, and it doesn't sound like there's any obstructions. A wheezing is usually going to have sort of a whistling sound to that, and that's because of a narrowed airway. So the 3D model that nobody asked me for in that unit, the 3D model that we have, this is my nice symbol model of breathing, but I love this thing because it's so simple and it still shows what's going on. What do you think the balloon represents? Okay, balloon represents a lung in this situation since I only have one of them. What do you think the Ziploc bag represents? The Ziploc bag represents the diaphragm. And so what does the plastic bottle represent? The rib cage, our thoracic cavity, that part of the body. Absolutely. So in order to breathe, you need to understand that there's no muscle tissue, whatever, in your lung. Well, there's no muscle tissue in your lung. Whatever is probably a little bit of a lie because you still have blood vessels which have muscle tissue in them. But it's not the lungs contracting that make you breathe. Is there any muscle tissue in my balloon? No. So it can't breathe on its own. The diaphragm, however, is a nice big muscle. And so when it contracts and relaxes, it changes the volume of your chest, of your thoracic cavity, where your rib cage is at. And just, I don't know if you go through it in chemistry or not, but there is principles. If I have less space, that decrease in volume increases pressure, and an increase in pressure is going to force air out of my lungs. When you have more space is a decrease in pressure, and a decrease in pressure is going to cause air to pull into the lungs. So when your diaphragm contracts and relaxes, that's what causes your lungs to breathe. Your lungs aren't contracting. There's no muscle tissue in them that causes them to open and close. It's all about your diaphragm. You ever get socked in the stomach? You ever get punched, hit, whatever, fell onto your diaphragm? You can't breathe. That's because you're irritating that muscle and it can't contract again. And so that's why as soon as that relaxes and it gets its normal nerve impulses, it'll allow you to breathe again. So, and that's what led me to, because we're talking about wheezing. So, oh, my lung's busted, no. But think of it as a balloon again. So I blow up the balloon, and then I take this part of the balloon, and I get it like really narrow, and I let the air out. Are you picturing the sound in your head? Okay, so that's kind of what they're talking about, is if you have a restricted airway, it's going to, that air is going to come out of there in a restricted, and it's going to sound like it's restricted. So that's our wheezing, our narrowed airway. Crackles, short, rattle, inhalation, and it sounds like you're getting stuff. Was that the one that I wanted? Okay, yeah, that's the one that I wanted. So crackles to me always sounds like, if you've got just a little bit of drink left in your cup or whatever, and you have a straw and you're trying to suck it up and it kind of bubbles like that. Well, you've got air and you've got a little bit of liquid that you're pulling up at the same time. So it's kind of making that weird sort of bubbly sound. And that's because that air is being forced through whatever fluid is building up either in the bronchi or in the lungs. The stridor is somewhat similar to wheezing, but this time we're forcing that breath. We've got something obstructing it. And so you're really trying to breathe. And then the last one, the rhonchi, snore-like sound, airways partially obstructed. I kind of think when I heard that, and once again, these are my notes, so as you listen to them, hopefully you wrote down what it sounds like to you. But it sounded kind of like, you flush a toilet. And it's almost a continuous sound, whereas the rest of these is either on an in-breath or out-breath, or it's part of that breath, but not the whole entire thing. All right, so like I said, I'm going to spend a whole lot of time with that. If you didn't have those things, then make sure that you go back and double-check and listen to those videos and add your observations as to what you thought it sounded like. All right, let's talk about the testing you did yesterday. GTT test. GTT test, what is that testing for? All right, so let's say you go to the doctor's office, they draw blood. Where are they going to draw blood from? Vein, which vein? That's where it's at. Cubital. This is our antecubital region. Our elbow pit is our antecubital region. And so median in the middle, cubital vein is where we're going to draw blood from. So my doctor draws blood from my median cubital vein, and then he runs a panel. What panel is he going to run in order to see what my glucose levels are? We'll do the test in just a minute. Hold that. But what panel will he run first? It's the metabolic panel. Glucose is a molecule that provides us energy. Metabolic panel, metabolism, that has to do with all of the processes that go along in our body, including metabolizing sugar to create our energy. So in order to see our glucose levels, they run a metabolic panel and they say, oh, glucose levels are high, so then let's run a GTT. Because it might just be that our glucose levels happen to be high at that time, bad time of day, maybe what you just ate, who knows. A GTT test is going to show how your body processes glucose over time. So is it just a one-time thing? Did we just hit it in a weird place? Or is it that you're truly having trouble processing glucose over the course of a day, let's say? So this was time, and time is passing. So for a normal patient, as soon as you eat something, your blood pressure is going to rise. It is going to spike for sure because your body's digesting it, processing it, getting all that glucose out of the food that you ate. And so it gets dumped into your blood. So for anybody, even a healthy, normal person, blood sugar is definitely going to spike. The thing is that it's not going to stay high for long. And our time period was 2 hours. Usually by the end of about 2 to 3 hours, the blood sugar level should go back down to normal. So we said patient A was normal. Take a look at your graph. It may not be perfect, but do you see a spike and then a return to normal or almost to normal? Does that sound about right? Okay, so that's what we expect to see if your blood sugar, so maybe we're just testing that metabolic panel at a weird time of the day and we just don't realize it. But if you run a glucose tolerance test that's going to tell you over a period of time what your body's doing with that food, with that glucose. And so the doctor would say, okay, you're all right, that's just fine. So then we said patient B had type 2 diabetes. So for patients that have diabetes, their blood sugar also is going to rise. It's going to spike, same as a normal patient's does. The difference is if you have, sorry, my nose really itches. If you have issues with processing that glucose, then that's going to stay high. It might come down a little bit, but it's not going to come down a whole lot. But it's definitely not going to go back to normal in the expected time period. When you look at your patient B and the CASA, C-CASA, do you notice that their blood sugar rises and then stays relatively high? Is that what it looks like on yours? Okay. That's about what it should look like. Now, there were a couple y'all had some squirrely readings on there, but overall, that should be what happens. So this is what we do first. So my orange line and my yellow line represent patients that I think have diabetes. Can I tell from this which kind of diabetes they have? I can't tell from this which kind of diabetes they have. This is just a glucose tolerance test. It just tells us how we process glucose. Type 1 and type 2 diabetes, that's sorted out. That's how people's body reacts in terms of insulin. Whether or not you have diabetes deals with how your body reacts with sugar. What type of diabetes you have is determined by how you process that sugar, whether or not you produce insulin, whether or not the insulin that you produce is effective. So the glucose tolerance test deals just with glucose. This does not tell us what kind of diabetes that a person is going to have. The insulin test tells us what kind of diabetes that a person has. So a normal person, purple was my normal person. Once again, a normal person, their insulin levels are going to spike because you get all of that sugar in your body, so now your body's like, whoa, we've got to get this sugar into the cells. So your body's going to produce a ton of insulin. That's what's supposed to happen. The thing is that once again, over time, your insulin levels should go back down. How do yours look? Similar to that? All right, so that's for our normal patient. Type 1 is a little bit easier, so we'll do type 1, and I know most people noticed the fact that we had one patient who had our blank bag that was our C-CASA, that they basically had no insulin levels straight across the board. Sound familiar? Okay. That's our type 1 diabetics. People who are type 1 diabetics usually don't make any insulin at all or very little insulin. There's so many different theories about what's causing type 1 diabetes. They don't have really a definitive reason why. It could be genetic. That's an entirely possibility. If your family has type 1, you're more than likely to, you have a more likely chance of also having type 1 diabetes. It's been linked to some illnesses. It's been linked to some viral infections, strep infections and stuff like that. That's destroying the cells in the pancreas. And once the insulin-producing cells are destroyed, well, we can't make insulin anymore. Genetics, viral illnesses. I think there was one other, but I can't remember it. We'll come back to that in just a second. But type 1 diabetes is usually a juvenile onset. It's usually when folks are younger. And of all the people that have diabetes, it's only about 5% of the folks that have diabetes have type 1. Most people that have diabetes have type 2 diabetes. So insulin for type 2 diabetes, those folks, their insulin levels are going to go up, but they're really going to stay high. So type 2 diabetics, they do tend to produce insulin, but their insulin isn't working. So there's either an issue with the insulin itself, or there's an issue with the cells that isn't allowing the sugar to come in. Insulin is a hormone. It ends up being a molecule, a little molecule like a ligand, and we'll look at that term here in just a second. But these little ligands have receptors on cells. They're looking for these certain places on cells where they can attach to. And when they attach to those places, they key some kind of reaction within the cell. So think of, oh, that would be helpful if I had my badge, wouldn't it? Think of insulin like your badge. Hold on. All right, so you want to get into the classroom. You go to the door. I've got a little scanny thingy on the door. The little scanny thingy on the door is kind of like a receptor on a cell. If this is my insulin molecule, beep, all I have to do is put it over there where the receptor's at, and it opens the door. Now, this is a bad model in the sense that insulin doesn't come into the cells. It just bonds to the receptor and the door opens. So that would be like if you had a little slot in there and you stuck your badge in there and the door opened and you were the sugar molecule and you can come in the cells. Sugar comes into the cells, the insulin does not. So it's not a perfect model. But, Abby, did you lose your badge or did your badge not work? Oh, no, right. See? Oh, I don't know what's wrong with me. Did you lose your badge or did your badge not work? Okay, so you had a badge, but your badge didn't work. So type 2 diabetics, they have the insulin, but they can scan it on the receptors all day long, but there's something either wrong with the badge or with the receptor. Now, we know my receptor is fine because all the rest of the sugar was able to make it in, so it had to have been an issue with the badge. So maybe the insulin molecule that the body made had some sort of denaturation to it, and so it wasn't built in the right way, so it couldn't link up the right way. That's entirely possible. Or, it's entirely possible, let's say everybody has a badge, but everybody, in environmental science. So environmental science, they're out there not opening the door. They had badges and their badges were fine, but there was an issue with the receptor. It hadn't been programmed so that they can get in. So it could be either way. So all the environmental science students had badges. They had insulin, just wasn't working. You had insulin, it just wasn't working. So type 2 diabetics can produce insulin, but for some reason their insulin doesn't work. So good model. The only bad thing is that if you're the sugar molecule, you wouldn't bring the insulin in with you. You would just put it on the receptor. The door would open, and you'd be able to come in. All right, so does your patient B kind of look like that? I think that was one of the ones that I'd seen the most issue with. Is B, your insulin should go up, but it should stay up. Look like that? Somewhat, at least. That's what it should do. Sometimes that insulin may work just a little bit, and it may come down just a little bit. But the thing is their sugar stayed high. So their body, sugar's still up, sugar's still up. So the body is processing that. Beep, boop, beep, boop. Okay, we still have a lot of sugar. Need to do more insulin. So they're going to keep producing insulin. The insulin goes to the door. It's not opening the door. Sugar can't come in. The sugar's still in the blood. Beep, boop, beep, boop. More insulin. So it's going to keep producing insulin. So it's kind of like a never-ending sort of thing where the cells aren't getting the sugar that they need, but the brain's trying to get the processes in order to allow that to happen. All right, so now let's look at the technical stuff for diabetes. in normal/healthy people, I don't like that term because everybody's normal based on what they have. If you don't have diabetes, your food is broken down into the microscopic molecules glucose. Glucose is a sugar. It's a monomer. It's a small little bitty sugar. So that sugar travels through your blood. As that sugar travels through your blood, there are receptors that pick up the fact that now your blood has more sugar in it. Just like the baroreceptors picked up pressure, there's receptors that pick up sugar content. They send that information to your brain processes it and decides, okay, let's put this sugar in the cells. So it sends a signal to your pancreas. Your insulin produces, your pancreas produces insulin, and that insulin acts as a little key to open the door so the glucose can go into the cells. Glucose is either going to go into the cells to be used as energy, or it's going to be stored. So about 2 to 3 hours after you're eating, your blood sugar levels start to decrease because it's either already been put into cells to use as immediate energy or it's been stored. Storing glucose is important because you're not eating every second of the day, and yet you need access to glucose every second of the day. Even when you're asleep, you have muscles that are contracting, so they need the energy in order to do that. You have neurons that are firing, so they need the energy in order to do that. You have biological processes maintaining homeostasis, so you need the sugar to be able to do that. So it has to be stored. And I think we find out later that that's called glycogen. We'll look at that in just a minute. So you take glucose molecules and you build a polymer, and that polymer is called glycogen. And then you have access to that sugar whenever you need it. So in those times between meals, you need more energy. So your body releases another hormone to break down that glycogen and make it into glucose and put it back into your blood. If you are a type 1 diabetic, I said that. Oh, okay. Oh, autoimmune, that's the one I was missing. So your immune system attacks itself. So autoimmune issue, viral infection, illness, genetics, those are like the top suspects as to what's causing type 1 diabetes. So once you have type 1 diabetes, you have it throughout the lifetime. So it's a chronic illness. For type 2 diabetes, I guess we want that too. Risk factors, it could be genetic. Once again, if you've got family history for it, then you're more likely to get it. The older you get, the more likely you are to have type 2 diabetes. If you're overweight, if you have a lifestyle that has very low activity, then you're more likely to get type 2 diabetes. Your ethnicity, um, African Americans, Native Americans, they tend to have a more likelihood of having type 2 diabetes, and 95% of the cases of 95% of the cases of diabetes are type 2 diabetes. So it could be that you are producing insulin, but your insulin is messed up. Maybe it's denatured in one way or another. The molecule itself is messed up. You are producing insulin, and maybe the receptor is messed up. So you have receptors on the cell, but it's not working correctly. I didn't mention the fact that it could be that the cell is insulin resistant. So the insulin's fine, the receptor's fine, but the cell itself isn't accepting any more sugar. So that'd be if I hard lock the door. You can't get in no matter what. Could be that type 2 diabetics are producing some insulin, but not enough to be effective to give them the energy that they need and take care of the sugar the way it needs to be taken care of, either stored or put into cells to create energy. Hyperglycemia. Hyper, we already know, means more. Glycemia is indicating sugar. People who are diabetic can have acute episode, and type 2 diabetics, that's a chronic issue. Once you have type 2 diabetes, you're probably going to have it for a while. Now, it is possible to reverse type 2 diabetes where it's not as much, where you can't with type 1. However, there are lifestyle changes, diet changes that you need to take care of, and if you've had diabetes once, then you're susceptible to having it again. So they can, both type 1 and type 2 diabetics can have hyperglycemia acute sort of issues. So short-term kind of high blood pressure or high blood sugar issues. And some of the symptoms that they might notice is that they feel really, really thirsty. Frequent urination. They feel hungry. They have blurred vision. They're more susceptible to infections, and any cuts or infections that they have are slow to heal. All right, so I said why. Why hungry? Why thirsty? What's going on here? Why would you be hungry? So here's my blood vessel, obviously. Guess what's in my blood vessel? Yes. And guess what these little circles represent, what these little doodads represent? Which component of blood? Good. All right. So because you could tell from the little donut-y shape right here, right? Obviously. So the rest of these I just made little ovals. These are all my little red blood cells. So if you're diabetic and you can't get the sugar into the cells, then the sugar is going to be here in the blood, right? Sugar in the blood. What happens to the water potential of my red blood cells If there's all of this sugar in the blood, what goes out? The water goes out of, into. Okay, so we just need a complete thought of that so that we've got a complete sentence and the reader knows what you're talking about. So the water is going to go out into the blood because there's more solute out here. There's more water inside the red blood cells. So back to my original question, what does that mean for the water potential then? Does the water potential of the red blood cells, is it higher or lower than the water potential of the blood? Water potential is higher because it has more potential to move, and it's going to move. Compared to it probably just makes a little bit more sense to say that the solution is hypertonic to the cells. Yes, the cells are hypotonic to the solution, but because we're concentrating on the direction it's moving, I mean, you could say either way, but it probably makes more sense to say that the blood is hypertonic. The water's moving out, but the water potential of the cells is higher because it has more potential to move. It's going to move out. So then what happens to my cute little donut-shaped red blood cells? They're going to shrivel up. So if they're like this and they're shriveled up, first of all, they're losing surface area. Surface area is important. The surface area to volume ratio, the little cubes, the surface area to volume ratio, this had more surface area, but it also had more volume, so it wasn't good. This had higher surface area to volume ratio. But if I scribble that up, if I shrink that up, I'm not going to have that much surface area, so it's not going to be able to have much oxygen that attaches to it to carry. Not to mention that these little dudes right here, they don't look the cute little donut shape. They're not going to be as flexible as these guys are, so they're going to get stuck. And because they're all shriveled up, they're more likely to stick to each other. So they could form clots. They could stick to each other in our very, very small blood vessels. So by the time we get down to capillaries, which are 1 cell thick, these guys are sticking in those spots. And so they're going to cause blockages of blood. We don't want that to happen. So I get thirsty. Why is my brain boop, 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 saying drink more water now? Okay. So what's our brain trying to do? A balance of the water and the sugar in the blood. So we want to dilute this. Right now it's really concentrated. If I add more water to it, if your brain says drink more, then you drink more, then it's going to go into the blood and it's going to dilute this. And if it dilutes it, then we get back to where the fact that they're isotonic and it's not making the red blood cells shrivel up. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's why your brain would be telling you that you're thirsty. All right, the other one said that it was hungry, telling you that you're hungry. Why would your brain be saying, I'm hungry, eat more, when you just ate and all of this sugar is stuck in your blood? And what's the right spot? Where do we want the sugar to go? Through the door of the cell. We want the sugar to get into the cell. What do we want the sugar to do when it's in the cell? No. That's me saying make energy so that you can run. So the sugar, when it gets into the cell, is part of that process that creates energy. So we want the sugar into the cell to be part of the process to make energy. Is the sugar getting into the cell? So it's not getting into the cell. Are the cells making energy? So they're like, hey, brain, we need some glucose. And the brain's like, boop, 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 boop. All right, eat more. We need to get some sugar in there. So you eat more. Does that help anything? No, it doesn't help anything because the sugar can't get into the cell in the first place. So symptoms of diabetes could be that you're perpetually hungry because you're not getting the energy, and that's where the energy comes from. It comes from your food. Frequent urination. Why you got to pee all the time? Because you're drinking more water. Why are we drinking more water? And why are we thirsty? What'd you say? You got to speak up. What'd you say? For what to be balanced? So for the sugar and the water, for that concentration, for that solution within your blood to be at the right level, we want to dilute it down. So you're drinking more to dilute it down, but then there's other sensors that are picking it up. Beep, boop, beep, boop. We've got too much blood volume. We have too much blood volume. Beep, boop, 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 boop. All right, let's do this to get the blood volume down to decrease our blood pressure. So let's urinate it out. Hey, the concentration's too high. Drink more, urinate it out. So it's trying to balance all that stuff out the best that it can, but it's got all of these forces that are acting against it. Okay, so that was frequent urination. Blurred vision. So you've got all of this sugar that's in your blood. What happens to the viscosity of the blood? So Kool-Aid's got a lot of sugar in it, right? You drink Kool-Aid. Very liquidy, though. Pancake syrup. Is that as liquidy as Kool-Aid is? Pancake syrup, more sugar, less sugar? Pancake syrup has more sugar in it. And so its viscosity, it's getting very thick, and it's not as liquid, it's not as dilute as Kool-Aid is, even though Kool-Aid's got some sugar in it. So the more sugar that we're adding to our solution, the higher the viscosity, the thicker it gets, the less likely it is to flow easy. Is your heart going to like pumping pancake syrup around? So that's going to be hard for it to do, so it's going to have to pump harder. Your blood vessels, your arteries are thicker, so they're made for that pressure, but are they made for pancake syrup kind of pressure? No, they're not made for that kind of viscosity. They're not made for that kind of pressure. So when you have excess pressure that's going on, it can lead to that blurred vision because now you've got all this pressure on your nerves, or you have blood that's not making there, so you're not getting a nerve signal. And so it's messing with your vision at that time because in the retina, those blood vessels back there, the nerves that are back there are pretty delicate. And so you can have issues with your vision due to diabetes. All right, hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia. Oh, I thought I had hypo there, but that's all the stuff that I just talked about. So some issues that you could wind up with due to diabetes, and especially hyperglycemic instances. Heart disease, because your heart's trying to pump pancake syrup. Stroke, because you've got pancake syrup, thick blood running through your blood cells. And not really. It's not really that thick. But that's a very visual kind of thing, right? You can have kidney failure, liver failure. These guys are the ones that are filtering your blood, and they're working overtime. Neuropathy. So that's when you lose sense at the end of your fingers or toes. So you have issues with your nervous system. High blood pressure, because you're trying to get pancake syrup through your blood vessels. I'll talk about ketoacidosis in just a minute. So blood's thicker, harder to pump, harder to get through your blood vessels, harder to transport oxygen. That's where all of that stuff's coming from. Heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, issues with your liver too, because the liver and kidney help to filter your blood. Neuropathy, my arrow up means high blood pressure. Ketoacidosis, and that says ketones, they're acids that are formed from the breakdown of food, or breakdown of fat. The blood is thicker, harder to pump, harder to get through the blood vessels, makes it harder to transport oxygen. Heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, liver, kidney filters blood, neuropathy, high blood pressure, ketoacidosis, ketones, acids that are produced from the breakdown of fat. Blood's thicker, harder to pump, harder to get through blood vessels and transport oxygen. So if you've ever seen commercials, used to be with old Wilford Brimley. I don't know who it is nowadays. So if you've ever seen commercials and they talk about diabetes, one of the things they probably mention is ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis is pretty serious. So we said that, or I said that, if you've got diabetes, a lot of times one of the symptoms is that you're hungry. Why are you hungry when you have diabetes? Why are you hungry when you've got diabetes? No. Get into that. Why are you hungry when you have diabetes? And why do we have less energy? So we have less sugar in the cells because the insulin's not letting the sugar get in. But where do we have too much sugar? We have too much sugar in the blood. So you've got too much sugar in your blood, but you're still being told to eat that you're hungry because the sugar is not making it into the cells to make the energy because for one reason or another, they can't, something's not working there. So it continues to make you hungry. Well, in the meantime, while the cells are waiting there patiently telling the brain, hey, we're not getting any sugar in here, send us some sugar. Well, in the meantime, I've got all this other work to do. I got laundry to fold, I got to do this, I got to clean the bathroom. I got to do all this other stuff here, so I still need energy to do that. Well, we don't have any sugar. I got that fat over there. So it's going to take that fat, and it's going to break down that fat because, yes? Bacon? Oh, do you have a costume on? Oh. All right, real quick, go take a picture. Huh? All right, so I don't have any sugar hanging around here, but I do have that fat over there. And the fat is also a sort of storage for energy. I don't like using fat for energy because it's really hard to break it down. It's got these waste products that are going to end up being, and I got to deal with those as well. Sugar is a lot easier to use for energy, but I don't have any sugar. Okay, fine. So they use the fat. Because if I don't use the fat and I don't make the energy, what's going to happen to the cell? It's going to die. The cell's going to die. So I've got to do something. So I take the fat, I break down the fat, so at least I have some energy, but a waste product from breaking down the fat are the ketones. And ketones are acidic. So now I've got these acids around that are destroying the cell, so I've got to hurry up and get rid of those. Otherwise, if they pile up, then that's going to kill the cell too. So ketoacidosis, ketones from that breakdown of fat. But I've got to break down the fat because I don't have any sugar, and if I don't do that, then I'm going to die. And I'm talking in terms of the cell. All right, and so that was just my little diagram that we talked about as far as what's happening to the blood cells. You guys always go through a mild form of ketoacidosis because when you sleep, that's a big chunk of time where you don't have anything to eat. And so your glucose, your glycogen stores end up being broken down, and so your body has to burn a little bit of fat. But it's not to the extent that it would be for a diabetic, and diabetics have that happening quite often. And then when you wake up and eat something, then you restore that sugar to your body, that glucose to your body. All right, so that's hyperglycemia. Hypo, low blood sugar, glycemia. Okay, so low sugar, it could be from medications, from meds. Could be from skipping meals. Could be from too much insulin. High or an increase in activity or exercise, because the more that you move around, the more activity, the more energy that you need. And so the more the body's going to use up the blood sugar stores that you have. Medication, meds. Skip meals, too much insulin, an increase in your activity level. So that's going to be using up sugar. And so you won't have sugar available. So you can have an acute, short-term hypoglycemic episode. So diabetes is a chronic issue, long-term. Hypoglycemic, those episodes are acute because they're short-term and you can take care of them. Move on. A person who is hypoglycemic might end up, and you probably felt that before, especially after maybe a big game, a lot of exercise, you start feeling weak, kind of feel trembly. Well, your blood sugar is really low. This is pretty dangerous for diabetics because they can pass, well, you can pass out. Anybody can pass out. But if a diabetic passes out, their body is not able to maintain homeostasis because they can't get sugar into their cells. And they can literally pass away from that. Shaky, sweaty, dizzy, weak, pass out. Because they don't have that balance necessarily. I mean, you could still, I mean, the same thing could still happen to us who's not diabetic. It could. We have a little bit better, you know, we have more glycogen stores and stuff like that. Well, so they might have, you know, fat stores, but then that's going to create ketoacidosis while they're passed out. Or if they have stores somewhere, that's going to, even if they break down glycogen, if it can't get in their cells, it doesn't help them because they have more issues than we do. So we pass out, but in the meantime, our body might be able to get those glycogen stores and get enough sugar in there that wake us back up so that we can go get something to eat. Somebody who's diabetic, they pass out. Let's say they have the same glycogen stores. They break that down, but it's still not getting in the cells. So they're just getting deeper down to the point where they can't wake back up again. So I know of a couple of parents of type 1 diabetics where they would go in there at night and wake their kids up in the middle of the night just to check blood sugar. That was before we had all the constant monitoring stuff, the digital monitoring that we have now. When diabetics get sick, it's an issue. So the whole COVID thing, people being diabetic was a big, scary concern because when they get sick, they produce hormones that help to put the immune system in motion. But then those hormones also affect sugar, or also affect insulin. So now it's making it even worse for them. So when diabetics are sick, a lot of times they go to the hospital or to emergency care. Once again, nowadays it's a little bit different because you have digital monitoring, which is minute by minute by minute, you know, checking blood sugar levels. But it's real easy for them to have a simple cold or flu and have it knock them clean out and have to go to the hospital. Because when diabetics get sick, they produce hormones to trigger the immune system, and those hormones also have a detrimental effect on insulin. They also affect insulin. So we've looked at a lot of diagnostics across patient vitals. We've already mentioned the fact that one of the tests for diabetics, diagnostic test for diabetics, is the GTT test. This test looks at how your body utilizes glucose. And it can answer the question, does this person have diabetes? Are they diabetic? Then, if necessary, you can run an insulin test. And this takes a look at the insulin production. And it answers the question, what type of diabetes does that person have? Oh, it's on there. Okay, never mind. I was just going to say that I didn't write down on there what the glucose level is, but that's on your metabolic panel. So it says anywhere from 65 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. So you usually want to keep your glucose level under 100, and to keep your total cholesterol under 200. Oh, and this is just what I talked about for our normal patient. If you're not diabetic, your blood sugar is going to rise right after you eat. Your insulin's going to rise right after you eat. But both of those levels should return to normal. They should go back down within a few hours. If they're not going back down, if blood sugar is not going back down, if insulin doesn't react to, so the insulin that was 0 straight across, that's a definite warning sign because your insulin should react to the fact that there's sugar in your blood. A couple of you guys had zeros on there, and I said, yeah, that's probably not a good thing. There should never be a time where we have 0 sugar in our blood. 0 sugar means that there's nothing getting to your cells. Your cells can't go through the processes that they need, and they're going to die. So we should always have something in our blood. Not diabetic, insulin levels rise after eating, but return to normal within a few hours. One of the ways that your doctor will see that you're managing diabetes is look at your A1C levels. Once again, if you've ever seen a commercial about diabetes, they talk about A1C all the time. Or the Coracetin AC, whatever, blah, 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 is talking about your heart stuff, and they talk about your A1C levels and diabetes and stuff like that. So A1C looks to see long-term how you've been managing your blood. Really cool. So red blood cells, they only last so long before they're destroyed and recycled by your body and new red blood cells are made. While red blood cells are living, doing their thing, well, so they carry oxygen, they carry carbon dioxide, but other things can stick to them too. So blood sugar can stick to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells. And so these cells can become sugared. And so that's kind of the kind of thing that they're testing to see how many of your red blood cells compared to the rest of them. You know, what's the percentage of red blood cells that look like they're sugared? And that's going to give an idea of how long your blood sugar levels are high. Because if your blood sugar levels are normal, then there's not going to be a lot of sugar that's attaching to those red blood cells. But if your blood sugar is really high, it's kind of like having too much cholesterol. It needs a place to go. Where are we going to go? We're going to stick it to places where it doesn't belong. And in this case, it gets stuck to the hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin A1C is used to track how well a patient's controlling their disease. So red blood cells live about 2 to 3 months. And you want an A1C number under 6. Because red blood cells just live from 2 to 3 months. They're constantly getting broken down and recycled by your body. If you've got a lot of red blood cells that are sugared, that have the sugar attached to them, then you are going to have a high A1C number because that percentage of red blood cells that have sugar on them compared to those that don't is going to be high. And that's going to come from high sugar in the blood over long periods of time. So your A1C is used to track how well a patient's controlling their disease. And it looks at the period of the past 2 to 3 months. And it can give a doctor an idea if you've had long-term high blood sugar. So red blood cells carry oxygen, carry carbon dioxide, but glucose can also stick to that hemoglobin. If your blood sugar is high for short periods of time, it's not going to mess with anything. But the longer the blood sugar is at a high level, the more the glucose binds to it and the higher A1C level is going to be. And so A1C is kind of a percentage of red blood cells that are sugared compared to those that aren't. Where'd you get the drug? Oh, I gotta get her test anyway. I'll just set you back over there. Yep, something to write with, spiral notebook. Multiple choice, you can circle if you want, but I would recommend a capital letter. Same thing for matching. If it says use a complete sentence, then make sure you write a complete sentence. All right. Got this? Hope so, because I just yanked it off there. Positive feedback loop or negative feedback loop? How do you know? Figure 8 kind of gives us an idea. It's a negative feedback loop. All right, so give yourself a whole page. Give you a big old figure 8. What does homeostasis mean? Okay, so we're trying to keep everything just right. We're trying to keep things balanced. So sugar is one of the things. Not too much, not too little. We want to keep it just right. And we have to maintain it throughout the day, constantly, because you're always needing that glucose for your processes that go on in your cells. All right, so when you're not eating, your blood sugar is going to drop. And this is the down part of the figure 8. I'm going down. I'm at the bottom part. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but just like low blood sugar, just since we're now learning about them. So when my blood sugar drops, I have specialized cells, and these cells happen to be in the pancreas. They sense the hypoglycemia, hypo, low glycemia, sugar. Cells in pancreas sense hypoglycemia. Can't leave it low. Beep, boop, beep, boop. What do? Specialized cells in the pancreas release glucagon. Glucagon is a hormone. It happens to be alpha cells in the pancreas. Glucagon is a hormone. Alpha cells in pancreas release glucagon. The glucose is gone. So glucagon is the hormone. Glucagon is a hormone that then targets and acts on your liver. When it acts on your liver is able to take that glycogen and break it back down into glucose. So it takes the stored glucose, because it's stored in the form of glycogen, and it breaks it into glucose and releases it back in the blood. So alpha cells in the pancreas release glucagon. That affects the liver, triggers the liver, converts stored glycogen into glucose and releases it into the blood. Glycogen is just a polymer. It's a macromolecule, a polymer of glucose. So the liver converts stored glycogen, breaks it down into glucose, and releases it into the blood. Blood sugar levels are low. Cells in the pancreas pick it up. Alpha cells release glucagon because glucose is gone. Glucagon is a hormone that triggers the liver. The liver takes glycogen and breaks it into glucose and puts it into the blood. So that causes our blood sugar levels to rise, and we make it back to homeostasis levels. But then we got the uppy part of our figure 8, because sometimes our blood sugar rises too much. So if you eat a meal, then your blood sugar levels are going to rise. So once again, we have these little sensory cells. They pick up that information. So cells in the pancreas sense hyperglycemia, hyper, high glycemia sugar levels. send that information to the brain. Beep, boop, beep, boop. The brain says, hey, we can't have that. So beta cells of the pancreas then release insulin. Insulin lets sugar into the cell. Insulin is a hormone. Glucagon is a hormone. Insulin lets sugar into the cells. Glucagon is the hormone released when glucose is gone. Glucagon is released when glucose is gone. Glucagon stimulates the liver. The liver then breaks down glycogen and puts the glucose back into the cells. Insulin is a hormone that's going to act on the cells and it's going to act on the liver. Well, the liver needs glycogen to break down. So insulin, whenever our blood sugar is high, is going to act on the liver and tell it to take that extra sugar and build glycogen up. It's also going to take that sugar and help it get into the cells where it needs to get into. So insulin is a ligand. A ligand is just a molecule that bonds to another molecule. So insulin is a ligand that bonds to the GLUT4 receptors on the cells. GLUT, GLUT4 receptors. Those are the receptors specific to let sugar in. GLUT4 receptors on the cells. So the process itself is actually pretty interesting. Imagine that back wall back there. Imagine that back wall did not have any doors in it. Can you imagine that? No doors in the back wall. Including those two right there. We have no doors. No doors. Okay. Well, you're looking over there for a door, so I'm just like these doors right here are not. Oh, okay. Well, back wall. Yes, there's a little itty bitty door under there that I crawl in and go, no. So the back doors, they're not, imagine that they're not on that wall. So this is a cell. There are no doors back there. So you've got blood sugar levels that rise in your blood, sends information to your brain sends out, says insulin. Then you come to that spot where my little scanner's at, and you have your insulin. There's no doors back there, but you have your little insulin card. Take your little insulin card and you put it in the receptor. Once you put it in the receptor, then inside the cell, a door is made and put into that wall, and it opens up. So the GLUT4 receptors, they're usually not in that cell wall until the insulin molecule binds to its receptor. Then it sends a signal inside, and then it's like a Monsters, Inc. kind of thing. So here's a door. They put it into that wall and open it up, and then the sugar can come in. It's a pretty neat little process. All right, so then, let's do that first. So the insulin key is able to open up that cell door, which is a transport protein. So that protein gets embedded into the cell membrane. It opens up and provides facilitated diffusion for that glucose to come in. So some of that insulin is going to go into cells where it's going to be used for energy. Some of that insulin is going to go into cells where it's going to be stored. So the insulin is going to signal your somatic cells to open up to let it in to be used for energy. And it's going to signal the cells in the liver to take that excess glucose and build glycogen molecules. And glycogen is our storage. Glucose is either going to be used as energy within cells, or it's going to signal the liver to store the excess glucose as glycogen. So then our blood sugar levels are going to drop. We're going to go back to homeostasis levels. All right, that's a lot of information for today. Unit 2 is a lot of information. Unit 2, Lesson 2 is a lot of information. So, things were set up with the intention that you didn't have any new assignments, any homework over this weekend. But here's the thing. If you're not done with 214, you need to make sure that you get that wrapped up. So I open up 215. Well, I mean, you'll have a little bit of time like bell work for 215 next week. But basically, all you need to do with 215 now is finish reading through that. It's got a couple of videos on there. It's going to have you look at a telehealth appointment. Has anybody used telehealth by any chance? Like a Zoom appointment with your doctor? They're pretty handy. We've done that with my mom for a few things. They do have their limitations, but they are pretty handy. So it looks at telehealth, and it looks at Cassie's digital monitoring of her diabetes, and it looks at her diary entries so that you can run through that and kind of see what it's like day in a life of somebody who actually does have diabetes. So that's essentially all that's left for 215 because this is the notes that go with 215. Next week we have to focus on protein synthesis, and protein synthesis is even more complicated than this. So it's going to take several days to get through the notes and the stuff that go on with protein synthesis. So you want to be done with 214. And when I say done with 214, you read through all of that, and you added the patient's information to those data tables, and you should look to see what's not right. At the very least, identify anything that's not right, or identify if your patient is healthy. I guess I should say that both ways. There is something that's not right. Find out what's not right. But you need to add all of that information to there. You should take a little bit of time, definitely tonight, probably maybe on Sunday, like that 15-minute review. There is a lot of information coming for this next test. Lots of tests, lots of stuff that you need to know about vital signs. Protein synthesis is coming up. Like I said, that's going to be complicated as well. So you need to be reviewing now. Hang on just a second. Hey, Miss Carlisle. Oh, abstract, that's about 3 weeks. Get that turned in early so you don't have to worry about that. Last day for extra credit late work is December the 5th, EOC. You know the drill. So you guys need to be at math at 10:25.